Hello, everyone. I'm your host, Cam Webster, and welcome to The Art of Boring, the podcast where we dive deeper into Mawer's investment philosophy and thinking in order to help you, our listeners, become more informed investors. Ultimately, we hope to connect you with the people at Mawer who find excitement in delivering on Be Boring, Make Money. On this episode, we speak with Vijay Viswanathan, Mawer's Director of Research, on the key characteristics of high-performing teams. Vijay reveals why we view Mawer's culture as a competitive advantage, some performance-building frameworks, and what it means to be a steward of the jersey.
This podcast is for informational purposes only. Information relating to investment approaches or individual investments should not be construed as advice or endorsement. Any views expressed in this podcast are based upon the information available at the time and are subject to change.
Welcome to the show, Vijay.
Happy to be here, Cam.
So what I wanted to start with, Vijay, is just the firm overall emphasizes culture as a differentiator, but specifically, how has it evolved over time? So was there something in the past history where there was an epiphany that, we should really follow this path, or was it more an evolution? So give us a sense there.
Cam, it's probably more of a evolution. I think a lot of stuff that happened before my time here at the firm. So I think if we go back to 1974, that's when Charles Mawer started the firm. And the reason why I think that's an important time to think about where the cultural journey started. Well, one, firm started then. But beyond that, it's just the firm was built around managing money for high net worth individuals. And Chuck had this mantra, which was you do the right thing for clients. And if you do the right thing for clients, then success will follow. And I think that is something that has been ingrained in our culture since the doors first opened. At that time, it's called Mawer and Associates. Back in 1974, I mean, putting clients' interest first is one of our core values. So I think that was sort of the start of the cultural journey for us. You fast forward to 2004, I think that was probably another pretty important point in the firm. And that's not to say things weren't happening in that time in between. But 2004, the firm got introduced to a gentleman named Jim Mawer, works at Focus Consulting, who's written a book called High Performing Investment Teams. Lo and behold.
So that's the Bible?
To a certain degree.
Oh, okay.
It has been something that we have held pretty core to our culture and our evolution as a firm. And a lot of the tenets of that, we started to take on in 2004, and I can get into some of the details of that if you want. But that's where it started, and pretty much since then, it's been sort of reinforcing the tenets around high-performing investment teams, or high-performing teams, because frankly, you could probably get rid of the investment part of that. I think it's applicable across teams, across disciplines, and we've added other frameworks around that over time and reinforced those.
Okay, so Jim Mawer's foundational. Was he brought in?
Yeah, so he's found our chairman and our vice chairman had met him at a presentation and then had brought him into the firm. And then a lot of tenets of the book seemed to resonate. And I mean, maybe to get into the details around some of the core tenets itself, I mean, at its core, thinking about culture and high-performing teams, you could think about performance as this horizontal line. And for those who have read the book or have been subscribers to some of the work that Jim Mawer and the rest of the folks at Focus Consulting have done, they would know what I'm talking about, and others may not. But essentially, you have above the line and below the line type behavior. So you think about this line, horizontal line, envision it on a piece of paper, that's performance culture. And above the line is where you want to be. And how do you get above the line behaviors? Well, it's really all about trust. At its core. I mean, I'm probably simplifying it.
Could you just rate trust over the horizontal line and say, above the line is high trust, below the line is low trust?
That's your starting point.
Okay.
And I say trust is key because it's foundational, because if you have high trust, then it leads to what we would call above the line behaviors. That leads to behaviors of being open. So openness of thought, candor, intellectual curiosity. Those are really important. Essentially, you create like a learning organization, which I think is vital and key to high-performing teams. The opposite can be true if you don't have trust, and that can lead to below-the-line behaviors, essentially behaviors that really come from fear, a culture of blame, a culture of defensiveness, a culture of closed-mindedness. So we think about the culture that we've built, they very much exhibit, and I think I'm oversimplifying, but exhibit these above the line characteristics. An environment that has an openness of thought, there's intellectual curiosity. These are all vital to what I think has been sort of the secret behind the high performing culture that we had. And it's all predicated on trust.
So how does it work in action? So every investment team at Mawer has a weekly meeting. Is that the main forum in which to put into practice this above the line trust building type behavior?
Well, I think that type of behavior happens in any interaction that you're having with anybody across the organization. If I were to think about how do you build trust and how have we built trust within the team, I think big part of it is working together. Yes. Weekly meetings would be part of that. I think there's something bigger though, Cam. I think that we spend a lot of time building trust with each other. It's a big investment that we make, not only in the research team, but across the firm. And so I think it's something simpler than that. But it's a lot of work. It's simple, but a lot of work. So how do you build trust with anybody? If you think about your own relationships that you have, how do you build trust? And the keys are like, you just get to know someone. You share stuff about yourself. And so if you look at over the years, we've done this now. Well, I've been at the firm for 10 years. So I've been to 10 offsite retreats as a research team. And the beginning of each retreat, or we spend a whole day together putting in work at the retreat. Half the day is about getting to know each other. And so much of trust building is just understanding where a person is coming from. And it's what I've found very interesting over the years that within the research team, we have got 31 people and we're all very different, which is a good thing. Different backgrounds, different educational backgrounds, growing up in different parts of the world. Yet there are a lot of things that are similar. You wouldn't think otherwise when you pull together a sort of hodgepodge of misfits, I call it. And so I think that is a big part of it, is that we invest a lot as a firm. We invest a lot as a research team into getting to know each other. That, I think, builds trust. And I think it's important when thinking about trust that it's not trust like, okay, Cam, I'm going to say something to you and I know how you're going to react. It's not that. Trust it's another level, and Jim Mawer talks about this. It's this idea that you can be vulnerable with somebody, in this case with your teammate. That I think is a trust on another level. And the reason why is that when you're able to be vulnerable with someone else, in this case you have a whole team that can be vulnerable with each other, that means that you are comfortable saying anything. And when we're comfortable saying anything, at the end of the day, what are we in business doing? We're in the business of what we need to do for clients to make value-add investment decisions. I think that's how it kind of ties back to investing. So you can say anything and not feel like you're going to be made fun of or that you're going to be held against you. And what that leads to is great discourse and debate and discussion, which we believe leads to better decisions. That's my long-winded way of trying to bring back trust and why it matters to anybody who's listening to this who's a client.
I was going to get in there with a question on how does it lead back to investing, but hey, you covered it, man. What I did want to maybe ask you and maybe share if you feel comfortable, but you mentioned 10 years of going on these retreats. Do you have one specific memory or a couple of specific memories of a conversation that said, wow, that was great, I have built trust with this person or the whole team? Or was there any situation that kind of comes to mind?
Yeah, well, I think there's lots of stories, and a lot of what we talk about too is sort of between all of us. So I won't get into details of what other people talk about, but I can talk about my own stuff because hey, I'm not breaching any trust there. But where I've found that I've connected with people at a more personal level, people on the team, is where we'd be vastly different, grow up in different parts of the world, as I had mentioned earlier. This desire from very young ages of trying to make money, like just collecting stuff. It was weird. Whether for me, it's like I'm dating myself, but it's like, hockey cards. For others on the team who are younger than me, it's like Pokemon and now it's the Bitcoin and stuff like that. I don't know.
I can outdate you because I actually didn't just collect cards. I used to play against the school wall to try and win the Bobby Orr card. And if you lost it, I think I ended up in tears. But
anyway. I actually have a card. I keep it at my desk. It's quite easily my worst investment, probably made when I was 12 years old. It's a baseball card. He's a baseball player was for the St. Louis Cardinals. His name's Bernard Gilkey. I tried to corner the market on Bernard Gilkey baseball cards because I thought, this guy's going to be the second coming of Joe DiMaggio. And he wasn't. So that's one I think is around that. I think, and then others, another one for me, it would just be, I grew up in a town, Newmarket, where I was make fun of myself. I was like the token brown kid in the class. And it's funny because you connect with other people on the team who had sort of similar experiences. And it was fantastic, great experience. I love Newmarket. That's where I grew up. But just you connect with someone there, like, oh, it's like, yeah, we grew up in different places. But wow, we had very similar experiences growing up just because of that. And so those are a couple that come to mind. There are hundreds of these, of which I'm not going to share with you.
It's fine. We'll have everybody on research come in and just they can tell their own stories. We'll collect them that way.
But it is very, very powerful, the ability to sort of open up and be vulnerable with each other. And what it's led to is within the team, and it's not just within the research team, across the organization, just a very high trust environment where people feel comfortable saying anything. And so, yeah, we talk about it in the context of people sharing stuff about themselves personally, but you could think about how that could be very valuable when discussing a business opportunity or an investment decision or anything of that nature, like a work-related topic, this ability that you and I are in a room discussing something that we can say and feel comfortable saying anything to each other. That, I think, is vital, and that, again, is that trust element and why it's so important for having a high-performing team.
So within the context of how we make investment decisions, we have a structure that is leader decides with input. So within each investing team, each investment strategy has a leader decides with input. So just connect the dots for us on that. I'm kind of leading you into it, but just connect
no
the
pun
dots
intended.
for us.
Yeah, leader decides with the input's the model we use. Like there are different models, decision-making models that firms would use. The one that works for us is leader decides with input. Other models out there would be like a committee approach or some sort of voting and things of that nature. It's not that leader decides with input's better than others. It's just the one that works for us. So what does it mean? It's pretty self-explanatory. Like leader decides with input. And I think the important part here is that input. That's where you need that high trust environment. That's where you have to have the place where people feel safe to voice their opinions regardless of their title, their stature, their years of experience. We talk about this all the time. It's that ideas matter, not titles. And so that is vital to making better investment decisions, is having that input, having that debate, having differing viewpoints, having independent thought. But at the end of the day, we believe you need that leader part. The leader decides with input, because without that, the issues you can run into is that you don't make any decisions. You get paralyzed by debate. So that's why we think it works for us. A lot of input, a lot of debate, a lot of dissent, a lot of diversity in thought. And then ultimately, there needs to be a person, we feel, that makes a decision. It's something that has worked for us over the years, and that's why we use it.
We started talking a little bit about the evolution. So we ended up, you described it more as an evolution as opposed to an epiphany. And here's the cookie cutter out of Jim Ware.
Well, I would call it. I call it evolution. But if you were talking to Jim or Craig right now, they might say it was an epiphany. Right?
Oh, okay.
So maybe it's just from my perspective, it's an evolution. If I were to put myself in their shoes, it probably was. Sort of a light bulb probably went off. I know that for me, when I was introduced to the concepts, it was the sort of light bulb went off for me, because it was like, oh, that it was something that I'd never been exposed to. And then it was almost like its simplicity is what I was shocked by. It's like, and then as you learn more about it, you realize how difficult it is.
Easy to understand, difficult to implement.
That's why we think it's a differentiator. That's why it's something that we've talked about as being a competitive advantage. Is that, it is hard.
Right. So Vijay, are there any specific tools or frameworks the team uses?
There's a few things that come to mind. I mean, we've been working with we love frameworks, and so we have something called the People Development Framework. We think that's been helpful in becoming more of a high-performing team. Some of the tenets of that actually come from some of the work also that Focus Consulting has done with us over the years. This notion of playing to strengths, one, right? Or other terminology would be focusing on your genius areas, essentially. A genius area being something that you're really good at, better than most, and you really love doing. And you know what our goal is, that we want people to spend the majority of their time on their genius areas. And who wouldn't love coming to work if you get to wake up every day, come to work and spend most of your day, if not all your day, doing work that you love and you're really good at? Sounds like a pretty good deal to me. And so that, I think, is one of the frameworks and a conscious decision that we've made, is that no, we want people to play to their strengths. We think it's important that we get very clear with the expectations with people. That's another framework. So people want to know. It's like, what do you expect of me? How does what I'm doing fit with where we're trying to go as a team or as an organization? What's my role in all this? We think that's pretty important. People yearn for feedback. How do I get better? And so how do you make a team better collectively? Well, yeah, you try to make the individual pieces better along the way. And that aggregates up into something that sort of compounds over time. And so this idea of a feedback loop is important. So these are all things that we've been introduced to over time as frameworks.
So Vijay, considering the Jim Ware model, have you come across any other organization, maybe a not-for-profit, a sports team, something outside of investing that exemplifies an excellent culture?
I could talk for hours about sports and got sports analogies.
We only have 30 minutes, Vijay.
Yeah, so. I know you got 30 minutes. So
give us one, maybe.
Yeah, so I mean, one that is sort of near and dear to my heart and talk a lot about is comes from the New Zealand All Blacks. I'm a big rugby fan. I got a few others in the firm. Well, I work with two other coworkers from New Zealand, so they like the New Zealand All Blacks too. Sort of, you have to by birthright, I think, if you're born in New Zealand. And I mean, the All Blacks, if you look at it as a high performing team, they are sort of the gold standard, especially put it into sports terms. I mean, they've won, I think the number, don't quote me on this, I think it's like 86% of their matches. Like, that's staggering. And you think about as a win percentage, and that's over decades where players are changing. And there's a bunch of concepts that come out of the All Blacks that to me are pretty powerful, and ones I think that we've employed within the firm. One of the bigger ones, this notion of, they call it better people make better All Blacks, and this notion that every member of that team is a steward of the jersey. So if you think about a rugby jersey, you put the jersey on, you're steward of that jersey, and you have one goal as a member of the All Blacks. And that is, you need to leave the jersey in a better place than you received it. And I think that model, that visual is pretty powerful. It's one that we have employed across the firm, is that, hey, we are all stewards of the jersey in our various roles around the organization. And I think what makes it powerful is that our roles, whatever we do at the firm, well, they're all important. Whatever we're doing, it's at a point in time. It's not like ours. It's like we don't own this. We are stewards of that role at this point in time. And the work that we do in that role, we are representing all the people who did it before, and we represent all the people who are going to come after. And our job is to make sure that the role is in a better place. So I use myself as an example. It's like I'm director of research, Canadian large cap manager. So I'm a steward of the role now. And so I got to make sure, so Jim Hall left it in a better place.
How do you evaluate where you're at as a team, as on a level of excellence, on a level of trust?
Yeah, it's tough. It's tough to measure that, right? Like, how do you measure it? I was going to ask you, asked me, I want to ask it back to you. Like, how would you measure it? but it's not easy to measure. I think we do surveys, we do check-ins with every member of the team to see where people are at. Those are ways that we've gone about trying to measure it, but it's not something that's easily measurable, right? So,
would the ultimate measure be investment performance?
I don't know, because the reason I say I don't know is because the performance piece is an output, and we don't really have control over that. So I think it's more. I think if I was going to measure it, sort of just thinking out loud, it will be more on the input side. So I think a lot of it is, okay, well, how much do we trust each other? There's surveys, you can run around that. I think it could be measured non-empirically around how much discussion and discourse there is amongst the team. Again, it's tough to empirically measure this.
But are there any incentives that you'd say loosely linked to culture building?
I can talk a little bit about the incentive piece and how that ties back. I'd say, what's the incentive to act sort of in an above the line way and be a cultural fit. Well, I think the incentive is that if you're not acting that way, then you wouldn't be a cultural fit. So I think you know what that means. So your incentive is no, you have to be a cultural fit if you want to be able to come in the building. So that's a starting point. But I think what you're getting at is just the incentives we have around how we compensate people within the research team, especially around variable compensation. And 2/3 of someone's profit sharing is determined by the inputs. And that's following the process and improvements to the process. I think a culture that exhibits high trust, people are willing to have the courage to try things. And the reason I bring that up is if people are willing to try things and to tinker and to experiment, they're also willing to fail. And I think that how that all ties in on compensation is that people actually get paid to fail because 1/3 of a person's profit sharing is based on trying to improve the process, trying to improve how we do things. I think you're only willing to do that if you have the environment in place that people feel comfortable trying and failing. And frankly, there is a graveyard of process improvements, but out of those have come great improvements to the process, which has led to better investment decisions, which ultimately has led to better performance, which leads to better outcomes for clients. And that's sort of the circle of life in this business.
Okay. So can you give an example of a process improvement that went through that?
Well, there's so many. I mean, we look at our discounted cash flow model started out, it was like a 4-line model. Or maybe it was 7 lines. And how that has evolved over time is one. The matrix, which is a tool that we use for helping with portfolio construction, started as a drawing on the back of a cocktail napkin, and that has evolved into something that's very instrumental in how we help with portfolio construction. So those are a few that come to mind. There's lots of things that we've adopted over time that have been improvements, and a lot of times there's things that fail and then they come back to life and different incarnation. And I think that just having that ability where people feel they can do that is a positive. I do have another thought on incentives, since I have the mic. One thing I think is
fire away.
One thing, and you didn't ask the question, but I think it's interesting to note. And I think that this is another thing I think is very important when you think about high performing teams. And where I'm going with this is I think that it's very important when you're hiring people that you hire people who are of high character, who have certain character traits that fit, have a certain level of humility. I think these are all very important. And I guess where I'm going with this with incentives is that I think that incentives only take you so far. Like, I believe you can only incent a person to do so much. Like, I'm pretty confident saying, hey, Cam, if I paid you an extra $10,000, I paid an extra $10,000 if you did 5 extra podcasts. I don't think it would matter. Like, I think you're going to do it anyway because you love doing it, because it's the way that you're wired. It's the content of your character. And so I think that's an important part. I think we talk a lot about incentive. We talk about it internally. We talk about it externally. And I think they're important to have. But the more time I spend in the role of director of research and leading the research team or helping to lead the research team, the more I think that incentives can motivate, but they don't really motivate. Like, people are self-motivating because of that's just the way that they're wired.
And that, to me, from what I've heard you describing here, is that, well, if you're spending 80% of your time in your genius area, then voila, there's the incentive. It's like, okay, you might get extra compensation here and there, but it's not going to motivate you to focus more in your genius area.
Probably not. I mean, people at their core, I think, want to do meaningful work. And meaningful work is getting to do work that you love doing, you're really good at, and there's some purpose to it. And I think that's sort of the goal. That's the goal of leadership, is to try to put people in, every single person on the team into a position where he or she can achieve that. And frankly, achieve that and do way more than they thought they could do. Way more than they thought they could do, because people actually can do way more than they think they could do.
Thanks. Those are important subtleties to
that
understand.
was just my side rant.
Yeah, love it. That's good. Within that side rant, if I were a listener and I'm taking level 2 CFA and I know all about Mawer, and we're established in 1974, they're Calgary based, now they have a Singapore office, got an awesome research team, they have this culture. how do I get a job there, and what would be the interview process if I were selected? So let's talk a little bit through that.
Yeah, so I guess first thing I'd say, if someone's studying for level 2, good luck on the exam. I hope they're studying right now. I hope they're listening to the podcast. It's just for a short break from studying. Although I'd say if I was taking a break from studying for level 2, I'd probably do something else. Go see a movie or something. But how do you get a job here? Well, it's highly competitive, and it's not just getting a job here at Mawer. I think getting a job on buy side, investment management, there are not a lot of jobs out there, but there are jobs out there, just not a lot. So how do you get a job here, or the recruiting process? Well, we're always looking for excellent people. We do have once a year a big recruiting cycle, big push, although we are looking for people all the time. And there's a whole process around that that people could partake in. It's a tough hurdle to climb. We've had a lot of interest over the years. And I guess what's important about that process, we believe it's culture is so important that we have not outsourced the recruiting function. And what I mean by that is that it's something that we do within the research team. Everybody in the research team spends time evaluating and meeting with potential candidates as we go through the process.
What's the reasoning behind everybody having exposure to a candidate?
Yeah, so I think a big part where we sort of landed on that is I think there is some sort of wisdom in crowds. And I think the big piece there, especially around cultural fit, is to see if there are any red flags for people. We have had instances where there have been people on the team that had yellow flag or a red flag around a potential candidate. There have been times where, I can remember one instance where Jim Hall, our chairman, and our CIO, myself, director of research, and Paul Maraz, deputy CIO, all three of us wanted to hire somebody, and there were 4 other members of the team, not in leadership roles, 4 other members in the team who had worries, red flags about someone as a cultural fit, and we didn't hire the person. So I think that speaks to just, the culture we have in the team, flat structure, but also the importance around why we have multiple people doing it. It's not exact science, but we think it's important to get that diversity of thought and the wisdom of crowds on people.
So I think we've given listeners a really good overview of what we view as a high-performing team. What I maybe want to wrap up with in terms of talking about excellence and performance would be, what do you see as the biggest challenges for continuing the high-performing team, say, the next 5 years?
That's a great question, Cam. The way I'm interpreting that, tell me if I got this wrong. Where do high-performing teams go off the rails? Is that kind of the question?
Yeah, you can answer it that way, sure.
Okay, so I think that a team's true grit and resilience gets tested when we face adversity. It's easy in my mind. It's not easy, but it's easier to be a high-performing team in the good times. I think it gets harder when faced with adversity. I think that's when some of the below-the-line traits or behaviors can come out. We as a team need to be tested, and we're going to go through that. And I think that will show true resilience. And I have a high degree of confidence that we'll be able to deal with that, because I think the antidote is leadership. It's you have people, and that's not just people who have titles. We have a lot, like everybody in the research team, people around the firm, we're all leaders in our own way. And so I think that's really important, because where things go bad is when the trust starts to break down. When trust starts to break down, that's when things can start to go below the line. That's when things start to go south. I think some other things that come to mind, or one other thing for sure, is just you start reading your own press. I think as soon as you start reading your own press, thinking that you're the greatest thing in the world, essentially that's your humility sort of reality check. Like if hubris starts to creep in and you start to again think you're the greatest thing in the world, that to me can be the beginning of the end. So that steady dose of humility is important. A way to check that again is, a lot of that has to do with leadership. Like we did, I think we do a lot of that as a team. We just had a post-mortem as a research team, and a lot of us were looking back at the year on learnings, and most of us led with a lot of the mistakes that we made. And, we had even some standing up and saying, you know what, like I'm looking back at the last 10 years and all of this could have been luck. And I think, and it's said with real authenticity, and it's not because, I think as soon as you start to believe that you're the smartest person in the room, that is probably the beginning of the end. We look at companies where they've had issues, management teams that have issues, so many times it's hubris related. So that's my opinion on why things could go wrong.
Great sum up. I really like that. We started talking about a line. This is kind of the finish line. And it might test your trust in me here, but this is the rapid fire round where we ask you a few
fire away, Cam.
Personal questions. Your best sports travel experience, because I know you like them.
Oh, Super Bowl 50.
Why?
I got to watch Denver Broncos win the Super Bowl. They beat Carolina Panthers. It was in San Francisco.
Favorite thing you do to relax?
Reading. Because it's so cold in Calgary, reading by the fireplace.
Okay. What are you reading right now?
A great uplifting book by John Kenneth Galbraith called The Great Crash. It's all about...
Just when you know the markets are, you got them all figured out, you pull out that one.
Yeah, that's what I'm reading. Well, you asked me, that's what I'm reading. Give me my honest answer.
Right. A couple of family questions. So I know you call your grandfather Tata?
Yeah, my dad's grandfather's Tata. I've referred to him, and I think I wrote a blog about camel and the tent and all that. Yeah. So
the question was the best Tata story.
Oh, the best Tata story. So, the best Tata stories now would be the stories that my dad tells my son.
Ah, okay. Perfect lead in the last question. Biggest surprise after becoming a father?
Biggest surprise.
For the first time.
Biggest surprise. I'm still shocked at how happy I feel. I have the worst day or just a crappy day. I come home from that day and Sachin, that's the name of my son, he sort of will yell out my name when I come home, big smile, and how happy that makes me feel. That I underestimated how good that feeling is. And it makes you forget about the day, and I guess at the end of it all puts everything in perspective, doesn't it?
Cool. Leave it at that. That's a perfect way to end it. Thanks a lot for being with us. We'll have you on again.
Thanks for having me.
Hey everyone, Cam here again. To subscribe to the Art of Boring podcast, go to Mawer, that's mawer.com/podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, leave a review on iTunes, which will help more people discover the Be Boring, Make Money philosophy. Again, thanks for listening.